is working. Okay, so tonight we are going to move into another genre of Jewish life and belief and practice. We've been doing holidays lately. We did some of the big picture issues and we've done some history things. Now we're going to bounce back into sort of what most people consider to be personal life activities. It's not happening in a sanctuary. It's not happening on a special day. This is day-to-day Jewish living. And it's going to be some of the ideas of how Judaism handles business and personal interactions with other people in commerce, as well as how we handle tzedakah, which is usually translated as charity. So we're going to cover all of these. And of course, you can probably guess, Judaism considers these to be religious activities. Right? Not that making money is a religious activity, but how you interact with other people through business is something that God cares about. And it's indeed something that the Torah spends a number of passages trying to give us information. And if you read Jewish law books, there are whole volumes devoted to how to do this. That may sound surprising, since people often think of spirituality as being something you do while quietly meditating or maybe joining together in a choral sing. But spirituality should be something that happens in our most basic of activities. And there is no activity, perhaps, in our lives that is as ripe for abuse and for self-deception as when we are trying to make a living. It is very, very easy for us to convince ourselves that what we're doing must be right because it's what I want to do and because it profits me. And so there are a number of different points where Judaism tries to lay out a marker and say, you don't go past here. Yes, it's perfectly fine to be competitive in business and to want to make a living, and Judaism has nothing against people even making a living and becoming rich. But there are ways that you do that are okay and ways that are not okay. Now, we're only going to go through a sampling because, like I said, there are entire volumes of Jewish law books that cover this topic in great detail. We're going to just sort of do the overview of some of the major issues and some of the major things that are still relevant for most of us. I'm guessing that most of you are not going to enter into complicated partnerships and interesting trade opportunities involving moving carpets from one part of the world to the other in exchange for something else. So we're not going to go into all those details. If you are, let me know and I can give you more information. All right, so basic business. The Torah itself gives us a number of passages that sort of frame in the overall outlook of Judaism on business. The first is from famously the Ten Commandments, do not steal. Now, a lot of people seem to think that stealing is something that only happens when a person is reaching into someone else's pocket and taking it out when they're on the train. But stealing while doing business, that is to say defrauding someone, is still considered theft. And that is the way Judaism looks at business, is there is the potential for theft here. And therefore we have to be on guard. Deuteronomy, of course, repeats that commandment. Also in Leviticus, this we read just a couple weeks ago, it reminds us again, do not steal, do not deal falsely, nor lie to one another, do not swear by my name falsely, so that you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Now, swearing by my name falsely may sound like a bit of a weird digression in this sentence, but swearing was one of the main instruments of settling disputes. Someone could say, I swear that this is the honest account of the agreement we had. Because if you had no witnesses and you had no paperwork, the only thing that was left was the person really willing to swear this? And so therefore in business, sometimes people would cheat by deliberately swearing falsely. And that is why God is reminding us when we're not supposed to be cheating. If you deal falsely, you're going to end up having to swear falsely, and now you are compounding all of the transgressions that you're committing. Do not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him, and the wages of a hired servant shall not remain with you all night until the morning. Meaning that if you hire someone to do a job for you, and part of the conditions is that you pay them when the job is done, you don't tell him, come back tomorrow and I'll pay you. You pay him when he is done. Prompt payment is considered to be a very important part of any employer-employee relationship. And if you've ever been an employee, you can understand exactly how it feels waiting for that paycheck when the boss has delayed it for no good reason. And we read from this week's Torah portion itself, and if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy of your neighbor's hand, you shall not wrong one another. That's great. Makes for nice bumper stickers. But what does that mean? There's an old saying that the devil's in the detail. In Judaism, we think God is in the detail. Right? The details of what counts as wronging, what counts as oppressing, what counts as being false in business, apart from the obvious things of, trying to sell a dog as a camel. What does it count? What does it mean? Well, when it comes to buying, we have to talk about first, what is a purchase? And most of our texts here are being brought either from the Mishnah or from Rambam's Mishnah Torah, because they are very clear in language. And if there's anything you don't understand after my explanation, just let me know and I'll fill in. So, an item is not acquired merely through a verbal agreement. This applies even when witnesses testify that people have reached an agreement. That's a general principle. Here's the example. What is implied? A person says, I am selling you this house, or I am selling you this wine, and a price is fixed, right? It's $500,000, it's $50, whatever. The purchaser agrees and says, I have purchased it. The seller says, I have sold it. And they tell the witnesses, serve as witnesses, that so-and-so has sold so-and-so, and so-and-so has purchased, right? So we've got everything laid out. We made the agreement, we shook hands, but what's missing? Nothing has actually changed hands, only words, right? Their words are of no consequence. It is as if they had never spoken to each other at all. The same applies with regard to a person who gives a gift and its recipient. We'll come back to the gift in a minute, but the basic idea here is if I say, I'll sell you this for $50, and you say, great, I'll buy it for $50, and the witnesses say, we hear that you're going to buy it for $50, we haven't actually made a sale yet. If it's just words, it's just words. So what happens? Well, what this mean? Well, if a purchaser had paid for an article and it was destroyed by forces beyond his control before he took it, before he took possession of it, the purchaser may tell the seller, give me the article I purchased or return my money. Right? Even though there are witnesses who saw that the article was destroyed by forces beyond control, the seller could not save it, and he was not lazy regarding the matter, the seller must return the money. For our sages ordained that a kinyan, an acquisition, a buying, is finalized through pulling. That is to say, if you want to own something, you have to take possession of it. And if you haven't taken possession of it, it's still not yours, which in this case is a good thing because it still belongs to the seller. And even though you sent him the money, if you haven't taken possession of it, it's still technically his property. And now that it's gone, he has to give you back the money that you had sent. Right? So ownership in Judaism is based off the idea of I have it. And if you don't hold it, you don't own it. That is a very important way to solve arguments. Because you can imagine in business, in that first half of the paragraph, a lot of disagreement. It's like, well, wait, you bought it from me. It just happened to still be in my backyard when the tornado came. So, hey, I don't have to give you back the money. It was yours when the tornado hit it. And what the rabbis are saying is, no, possession is only marked by actually taking possession, not just with words and other things. And even if you send the money, that's not enough. You have to grab hold of it in order for it to become yours. Make sense? Okay. But what happens if you did all that word stuff and then someone backs out? Right? If someone didn't take possession of it, but we went through the whole, I'm going to sell you the wine, $50, witnesses were there, but no money's changed hands and the wine hasn't changed hands. And then I go, you know what, on second thought, what happens? Well, whenever a person pays money, but does not perform pulling on the produce, meaning does not take possession, although the purchaser does not acquire the movable property, as we've explained, it's not theirs yet until they take hold of it, the person who retracts, whether the purchaser or the seller, the person who cancels the sale, is considered not to have conducted himself in a Jewish manner. So you'll notice the first few pages we looked at, technically...
Sorry,
yeah.
I think this is already somebody.
Is there someone at the door?
They pulled out. Car.
Ah, okay.
Let's see who it is.
I think on this side's closer.
Leave the door open.
Oh, two people.
Oh, good. We only have to hold the door once then.
Well, I guess all we have to say. I did bring 2 books I can show you after that I read.
Both are very good, yes.
So yeah.
I'll give you some, those are more sort of general
Yeah.
topics. I'll give you a few, some advice on some more specific books as well.
Okay, cool. I was kind of like in the beginning of everything, so I'm taking everything as a beginner still.
You know, we're all beginners of different degrees. Okay.
Hello.
Sorry. There weren't 2 cars out there?
Yeah, Mayrin.
Yep.
She went to the bathroom.
Oh, okay. So, but she's in the building, so we're okay. Okay. All right. So, have a seat and let's get back. So, even though technically the sale doesn't happen until you've actually had that giving of the item that has been bought, if you or the seller renege on the deal, that's not considered right. Legally, it's okay, but ethically, it's wrong. Now, this gets back into our question of what is the purpose of all this legislation? Why did God give us these rules for how we do business? And the underlying idea, of course, is to build a better and happier community. Because if people keep cheating each other, that's a big problem. And this is where the rabbis are saying, even if you could technically mess with someone within the law, you shouldn't. Because if you do, that's still eating away at the feeling of the community. Now people are not trusting each other. And as soon as we have to rely on a piece of paper and rely on all the witnesses and rely on all the other technical things, that hurts the community. My teacher, Rabbi Dorf, said that when he was young, his father was in construction and he used to ride along with him in the truck. And they would go to the supply depot. And he would talk to the guy at the supply depot and say, I need, this much wood, I need this many tiles and all of that. And the guy would write it all down and they'd shake hands and walk away. And little Dorf, before he became a rabbi, asked his dad, well, wait a minute, you didn't get a receipt, right? You didn't get a contract from the guy. How can you be sure? What happens if he doesn't deliver on time? And what happens if he tries to change the price? And his father said, if he tries to change the price, no one will ever do business with him again. If he doesn't deliver on time, people will not do business with him again. And if he doesn't do it the way he's supposed to, what is this piece of paper going to do for me? Right? Well, how is that going to help me do my job? I mean, sure, I could take him to court, but that doesn't help me do my business. So I trust him, he trusts me, and everyone does better. And the pieces of paper can stay in their folders. And so that is what Judaism is trying to build in a community, is that sense of trust and reliability. And even though technically you could renege, the rabbis are going to be very, very critical of people who do that. So even if the purchaser only made a deposit, if either of the parties involved retracts, the party is eligible to receive the title mishapara. Now this is a sort of technical term, which I'll explain. So what the sages said, the one who exacts payment, mishaparaz, from that sentence, from the generation of flood and the generation of dispersion, that's the Tower of Babel time in the Torah, will ultimately exact payment from one who does not stand by his word. Basically saying, if you break your word, it may not be illegal, but God is going to get you. Right? The God does not smile upon people who break their word. Now, notice this isn't breaking the word in the sense of swearing falsely or having made an oath or even having lied. It's, I'm going to buy your car, I'm going to spend $5,000 for it, great, I'll be here tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and you say I changed my mind. That's what they're talking about. Right? If you make a deal, you should stand by your deal. And even if you can't be prosecuted in the court for not standing by your deal, we still believe that God is not looking happily on this decision. In fact, the generation of the flood and the generation of dispersal, many of the rabbis, when they discuss what were their crimes, talk about very minor crimes of people taking a bean when they were walking through the marketplace. And even though the bean wasn't worth enough to be called stealing, if everybody takes a bean, the bean seller ends up with nothing. And they said that these were the small petty crimes that people committed against each other that ultimately tore apart their societies, as we saw during the Noah episode and the Tower of Babel episode. So you stand by your word. When you make a deal, make a deal. And if you're not sure that you can make a deal, don't make the deal. Right? You just say, you know what, I think I'm going to buy the car tomorrow. I'll let you know in the morning. and then if he finds another person to sell it to, he can sell it to the other person, and you haven't inconvenienced him at all. When a person agrees to a transaction with a verbal commitment alone, it is appropriate for him to keep his word even though he did not take any money at all, did not make a mark on the article he desired to purchase, nor leave security, right? Back in the day, you would put a little mark on the bottom of the pot that you were going to buy or something. If either the seller or the purchaser retracts, although they are not liable to receive adjuration, meaning they don't have to go in front of the court, they don't have to swear or anything, for Misha Parad, they are considered to be faithless, and the spirit of the sages does not derive satisfaction from them. This is not the way to behave. Okay. Gifts. Similarly, if a person promised to give a college gift and failed to do so, he is considered to be faithless. And if you promise to give someone, oh yeah, for your birthday, I'm going to make you the most beautiful cake, right? Now that's just a gift. We're not paying me for this. It's not an exchange of goods and services for compensation. It's a gift. When does this apply? With regard to a small gift, because the recipient will depend on the promise that he was given. If I say, oh yeah, I've got an extra, what do people still use now? I'm gonna say like Walkman, but no one uses a Walkman anymore. I've got an old phone at home that I don't use anymore, right? So I'll bring it in tomorrow, and you can use it. You can give it to your kid and let him use it for playing his games, right? Good. The guy goes home. He says, "Hey, guess what? One of my coworkers is going to give me a phone so you can play with it, right?" So now I'm telling my kid about this, and the next day the guy shows up and says, "No, what? Actually, I looked at it and it still works, and I've decided I'm going to keep it," right? And technically, you can't take me to court over this, but I have done you wrong in this exchange. However, with regard to a large gift, oh yeah, your kid got the driver's license? Tell you what, I've got an old car I don't use, right? You can have the car. By contrast, the giver is not considered to be faithless if he retracts, because the recipient does not believe that he will give him the articles until he transfers the ownership through a formal kinyan. I'll believe it when I see it is the modern English version, which is if someone promises you a house, you don't sell your current house and put everything in the storage waiting for your new house. You say, okay, that's great. Thank you so much. When can I pick up the keys? When can we sign the paperwork? You don't change your life on the promise of a large gift like that. Small gifts, you do make adjustments, expecting the person will follow through. Big gifts, people are more cautious and they don't have the same expectation. So it's ironic that the rabbis are saying you're in more trouble if you break your promise for a small gift than you are if you break your promise for a big gift, because you do more damage to a person because they will rely on you for a small gift and they won't count on you for a big gift because people don't expect that, and they will be happy, of course, but only once you actually make good on it. And sometimes that is backwards to how we think about things in American business. In American business, the bigger my disappointment, the more angry I'm going to be. And this is saying, no, people know how to manage their expectations. And it's all about the disappointment that comes from small things that make usually the biggest impact on the average person's life. Make sense?
What's a kinyan?
A kinyan is an acquisition, a purchase. So we used the term pulling before. So it's to buy something through that formal act of taking, as opposed to signing a piece of paper or anything else. I should point out, when we have a marriage, we do a ketubah, which is a formal contract between the groom and the bride. And in order to acquire the contract, to be bound by it, there has to be a taking. And so the document is passed or pulled from one person to the other, or a symbol of the document is pulled from one person to the other, because you can't just say, sure, I agree to that. You have to make an action showing that you are willing to acquire this thing, not just say, yeah. We need action, not just words. Although words usually are considered as an action in Judaism, in purchasing or contracts, there needs to be a real physical action more than just lips. Good? Good. Price oppression. This doesn't just mean things are expensive. This is a particular form of price problems, of mispricing, I guess you might say. And the technical term that gets used is overreach, which is in Hebrew is called ona'ah. Right? So whether one overreaches knowingly or is not aware that there is any fraud, ona'ah, in the sale, he is held liable. So what does this type of overreach mean? Well, how much does the overreaching have to be in order that he will have to repay it? 1/6 of the value of the item is fraud in which the exchange is valid, but the defrauder has to pay the entire difference to the cheated person. So what does this mean? So this means you go into a shop and you want to buy a new stove. And you go into the shop and there are no price tags on the stove. And you call over with the salesperson and you say, how much is this stove? And the salesperson says, that stove is $500. Great, right? I'll buy it. But in reality, the stove is only $250. That's the real legitimate price for the stove. So you have now paid 100% more than you were supposed to. That is considered illegal in Jewish law. And if you only pay a little more than you were supposed to, 1/6 more, then the seller, when you find out the real price, has to give you the difference. And the buyer, if it happens the other direction, also has to give the real difference. So take a different example, one that happens quite commonly. Someone is buying a classic car, right? They want to buy an old Mustang. And they go to somebody who doesn't really know the value of a classic car. And they say, oh, well, you know, the car is pretty old, so I'll give you $1,000 for it. And imagine the car is really worth, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. In Jewish law, that is illegal. It's not, ooh, I got a good deal. It's you have just defrauded that person. Now, you didn't lie. You didn't actually say, oh, no, it's only worth X. You just offered them a certain amount of money. And you may think a deal is a deal, so hey, they shook on it. It's not my fault they didn't know their business. In Judaism, that is considered to be a violation of fair business. If you take advantage of another person who doesn't know the true value of what they are buying or selling, and it doesn't matter which person is in the position of more power or knowledge, if you take advantage of another person, then if it's between the real value and 1/6 more, then you have to pay the difference. If it is more than that, if I'm not mistaken, sorry, if it's less than that, less than 1/6, then the defrauder doesn't have to repay anything because it is the normal practice to waive the rights to frauds amounting to less than that. Meaning, there's a little margin, plus 1/6, minus 1/6, that sometimes business will go a little bit this way. But if it's 1/6 over or 6 under, then we have to pay that difference. If the overreaching amounts to anything more than 1/6, the exchange is void. Right? You didn't actually buy anything. It's the transaction is canceled, and the cheated person may return the article and not buy it at all. The cheater, however, may not retract if the cheated person wishes the exchange to stand. So let's say, for example, I buy that fabulous price for the stove, and the guy says, you know what? I should have said $750. He agreed too quickly for $500. You know what? I'm going to cancel the sale, and I won't deliver it to him. And I'll put the price up for the next, sucker who walks through the door. If you call the guy and say, I sold you that for $500, but it's really worth $250, so I'm going to cancel the sale, and I'll help you here. And the guy says, no, I want the stove. $500 is fine. You have to deliver the stove. It's the person who was cheated that gets to decide if they want to sell, to let the transaction stand or not the cheater. Make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
except for, I guess, with a lot of things, I would wonder how you would determine the true value.
So in terms of price, establishing a fair price, there were some things that the rabbis assumed that you couldn't establish a truly legitimate price. There were certain luxuries that were, rare paintings or things like that, where it had to be an honest, actual, Leonardo da Vinci, but what the real value of a Leonardo da Vinci was a little bit more open for wide debate and discussion. But the rabbis were more concerned about people cheating each other for regular purchases, that there was a reasonable, fair market value for that particular product. So, if you go into a store, you'll get a sense of what is the range of costs for this type of item. And then if someone tries to deviate excessively, Judaism does not consider that to be acceptable. This is something that is, you might say, a little anti-capitalist, right? And in capitalism, it's basically whatever the market will bear. If you'll pay $10 a gallon for gas, even though the guy next door is selling it for $2.50, then it's fair for me to sell gas for $10 a gallon. And Judaism says, no, it isn't. Right? There's a fair value, and once we've got that, there's a little bit of a cushion, and that's where you get to make your profit. But you don't get to do more than that. And yes, this is a little different than the way we handle it in America.
So that would cover price gouging, like if there's a hurricane or something.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Quantity. Let's say you don't make a mistake with regards to the fair market value. You make a mistake with regards to how many things you've actually sold or delivered. Well, if one sells commodities to another by measure or by weight or by number and has made even the slightest error, the difference must always be returned, because the laws of overreaching apply only in errors of value, while in errors of quantity, the difference must be returned. Thus, if one had sold to another 100 nuts for a dinar was a small amount of money, and it is found that there were 101 or 99, meaning for the seller's favor or for the buyer's favor, the transaction is valid, but the amount of the error must be returned to the aggrieved party. Right? If you get out to your car and you realize that the cashier gave you something extra in your bag, you take it out of the car, you walk back into the store, and you return it to them. You don't just say, hey, my lucky day. And likewise, if they realize that they didn't give you one of your articles, they didn't put the shirt in the bag and you left, if they notice the shirt, they've got to track you down to give that back to you, because that's an actual, not just a value of the item, it is the number of the item, and quantity is important. And so too, if someone has sold something and a defect of which the purchaser was unaware is found on the purchased article, the purchaser may return the article even after the lapse of many years, because this was a transaction in error. Right? So if I go to buy a cabinet from you and you knew that there was a problem with it and I didn't notice the problem when I bought it, and then I get home and it is clear that the problem was there from my purchase time, I get to bring it back to you, even, as they say, years later, and say, hey, you sold me a faulty cabinet, and that means you have to give me back my money. And Judaism takes the honesty of business very, very seriously.
I think that's pretty universal. What you're talking about, to me, is universal.
It is,
it's
but
universal.
many other legal systems, like the American legal system, have what is often called statute of limitations, which means after a few years, it doesn't matter. You should have found out by then. It's not our fault. America doesn't care so much about the error in fair market value. If you agree to pay it, as long as they weren't lying, that's okay. In Judaism, it doesn't matter whether you agree to pay it or not. If it seems unfair after the fact, if you go to an expert and say, hey, look at this, great thing I bought, and the expert says, that's not worth $1.50, you get to go back to the guy who sold it to you and say, you sold me something and charged me too much for it. Even if you were happy before you found out the truth. And even if he didn't lie to you or in any way deceive to trick you into the purchase. So in Judaism, what you'll find is that there's more protection for both buyers and sellers about things being fair than there is in many modern systems. What you will find is that many cultures have those same ideas. But the legal system doesn't always reflect the cultural value of being honest. And sometimes people can be dishonest but legal. And generally speaking, Judaism says, no, if you're being not a nice person, then the transaction is likely to also be invalidated, and the person will get their money back or get their item back, depending upon which person took advantage of whom. Quality. When a person exchanged one article for another or one animal for another, the law of ona'ah, of overreach, of taking advantage of someone, does not apply. This is true even when they exchange a needle for a necklace or a lamb for a donkey. Lambs were cheaper than donkeys. The person may desire the needle more than the necklace. Now, why is this different for when you're doing a barter and a swap than when you're doing money? Well, because money has a fixed value. Right? Money is, by definition, worth what it says on the coin or the dollar bill or $100 bill. Money has a community agreed upon worth, and a needle is worth a certain amount of money, and a necklace is worth a certain amount of money. But the necklace and the needle itself, they don't have a universally agreed upon value to the person who's currently holding them. So if we're going to swap them fair to each other and we're both happy, that's okay. It's only when you go through the middleman of cash where it can become a problem. Because once you hit cash, you're now in the marketplace, and in the marketplace there is a number that goes along with this thing. So, you know, I may need a needle, you may need a necklace, and if we each have those, we can swap it, and both of us will be happy for it, or lamb and donkey swap as well. However, when a person exchanges produce for produce, meaning apples and wheat or things like that, the laws of ona'ah do apply, whether the produce is evaluated before the sale or after the sale. In the ancient world, food crops were basically cash, because that was what most people made. That was what most people's salary came in, because most people were farmers and they didn't usually work for cash. They worked just to grow their stuff, and then they would sell it as cash. But that meant that there was a very universally agreed upon value of how much do apples cost? How much does wheat cost? That was something that people paid attention to very, very carefully, and many people used their produce as cash because they didn't have coins in their pocket. They just had a barn full of produce. Make sense? Okay, I know, a little different than the modern world. Most of us now, we work for a paycheck, we don't work to grow apples. Waiving rights. Although a person tells a colleague, we are completing this transaction on the condition that you do not hold me responsible for unfair gain, the laws of ona'ah still apply. You can still take the person to court and get the difference back. When does the above apply? When the statements are made without being explicit. In such an instance, the other party does not know how much money he is forgiving in favor of his colleague. Meaning, or we'll give the other version. If, however, one explicitly mentions the amount of unfair gain, the laws of ona'ah do not apply, because all conditions that are accepted by both parties are binding in cases of financial law. So, go back to my selling of the oven or stove or whatever it was. If I'm selling the stove and I say I'm going to sell you the stove for $500, but it's only worth $250. If you say okay, you can't come back tomorrow and complain. If, on the other hand, I'm selling you the stove for $500, but it's not really worth that, if you buy it, you can still come back tomorrow when you find out how much it really is worth, because you didn't realize how much you were giving up. You didn't realize what your loss was. So if I tell you exactly how much I'm taking advantage of the situation, and you agree to it, we have a deal. If I just tell you I'm taking advantage of you, but not by how much, even if you say, okay, take advantage of me, it still doesn't count as a real deal, because I don't know how much I've been taking advantage. I can only agree to something that I have all the information on. And if I only have partial information, it doesn't count. Make sense? Okay. So, regulation. How do we handle all of these prices and the community? Well, the court is obligated to regulate prices and appoint officers of the law so that the people at large will not be able to reap whatever profit they desire. Meaning you can't just sell things for whatever you feel like. There is a limit to how much profit you can make. Instead, the court should regulate that a person should earn only a profit of a sixth. A seller should not profit more than a sixth of his investment. So, after you've covered your costs and after you've covered all of the other things that go into making a business happen, when you go to sell something from that total cost to you, you can sell it for up to a sixth more than what its total cost was to you. Beyond that, and it's considered unlawful. And the community used to, when we were in control of our community like this, have people that would inspect the marketplace and make sure that people were not overcharging. and or that other people were underpaying. This was part of what it meant to have a regulated Jewish market, that there would not be this problem. However, there is a limitation. When does the above apply? With regard to articles on which our lives depend: wine, oil, fine flour. With regard to herbs, costus, frankincense, and the like, which I guess were kind of luxury items, by contrast, a set limit is not established by the court. The seller may take any measure of profit he desires. So if you want to go into the spice trade and you want to bring cinnamon from halfway across the world and sell it in Morocco, you can charge whatever you like for your cinnamon. On the other hand, if you're selling wheat, which is what people need to stay alive, that there is a limit to how much profit you can make. Make sense? And what about warranty? Buyer beware. Well, whenever there is a blemish that the people of the city agree is serious enough to warrant the nullification of a transaction, the article should be returned. Whenever the people agree that a fault is not considered to be a blemish, the article should not be returned unless the purchaser explicitly stated he refused to accept even the slightest blemish. So basically, if you buy something and everyone says, man, that thing is totally wrecked, and everyone would agree that that is not a working stove, car, or whatever you're going to buy, then that's considered to be an invalid transaction and everything reverts to the original owners. On the other hand, if people say, yeah, cars get dings, that happens, right? Then even though you didn't notice the ding, it's a ding. It's not such a big deal. Unless you said, I'm only buying this on the condition it's perfect, right? If I get home and I find a scratch on this car, I'm going to be back here tomorrow asking for a refund. Then yes, if you get home and find the scratch, you're allowed to come back and ask for the refund. Make sense? Why is it handled this way? Well, the rationale is that whenever a person conducts business without making any specific demands, it is assumed that he is following the prevailing customs of the community. It's sort of like a reasonable person measure, right? Would a reasonable person want their money back for a scratch like this? Would a reasonable person want their money back if the engine blew up the next day, right? That's a reasonable person test. And unless you give instructions that are different, the court will follow the reasonable person measure of whether or not you have a claim for a return of this item. Good? Good. Whenever a person purchases an article without making any specific statements, it is assumed he desired to purchase an article that is perfect without any blemish, because that's kind of what we normally think, right? When you go to the store and you buy something off the rack, you don't expect to get home and find a big stain on the shirt. You generally expect that you'll buy something that is in the appropriate condition for what you're purchasing. Even if the seller explicitly said, this article is sold to you on the condition that you do not return it as blemished, which in modern term would be, I'm selling this as is, the purchaser may nevertheless return the article, unless the purchaser says, I accept any blemish that I will discover in this article, although it causes it to be worth such and such less, right? Unless you specifically say how much you are waiving of the cost of the value, then it's assumed that you didn't waive that amount, and therefore you have the right to bring it back. For when a person waives the money that is due him, he must know how much he is waiving and make an explicit statement to that effect, as applies with regards to the laws of overreaching and defrauding each other. So one way I like to compare this is, all of those things that we click through of user agreement things, where do you agree to the new terms? Yes, yes, yes. This is basically saying that when you agree to any purchase, you have to be explicitly told exactly how much you're losing out in the exchange. Because if you click on something without realizing how much you're losing out, you don't see that value. It wasn't printed. It just said, costs. That wasn't a real transaction. I have to have equal information to whoever I am dealing with, right? Seller and buyer need to have equal information between the two of them. And if they don't, then one had an unfair advantage in the transaction, and that can ruin the whole transaction. Makes sense, right? Yeah, not always the way we handle business nowadays. Theft. What does it actually mean to steal? I know it might sound like, right, it means to take something. A little more detail than that. Whenever a person who steals something worth more than a pruta was like the ancient equivalent of like a penny, he has sinned. he must repay. The Torah prohibits stealing even the smallest amount, meaning you can go to the court trial if you steal a penny or more. If you steal something worth less than a penny, we won't have a court case, but you have still sinned, right? You still have broken the commandment. It is forbidden to steal as a joke, planning to return it or pay. All is forbidden in case you get used to such behavior, right? So you don't even get to play around by saying, shh, I'm going to take his phone. He's going to go totally nuts. I'll give it back to him tomorrow. No, not allowed, right? It's also just not funny, but it's not allowed. So what is a thief? One who takes someone money secretly without the knowledge of the owner, such as one who puts his hand into his neighbor's bag and takes money without the owner seeing it, and similar cases. But if he takes it openly and publicly by force, he is considered not a thief, but a robber. So theft is simply the taking. Robbing is the methodology, right? So if I come up to you and I say, give me your wallet, I'm now a robber. On the other hand, if I take your wallet without you noticing, I'm a thief. And the penalties were a little different between being a thief and being a robber. When convicted, he must pay twice the amount stolen or its worth. If he returns the property without being convicted, he pays no additional fines. So let's say I take your $100 bill, and then I get caught, and I go to court, and I get convicted. I have to give you back $200. Right? It's not just the 100 I took, it's 200. On the other hand, let's imagine I take the $100 from you, I go home, I feel lousy about it. I come back to you and say, you know what, I stole this from you, I'm returning it, we're good. I don't get fined additionally if I'm the one who initiates the return. But if it's the court initiating the return, then all the additional penalties add up. Make sense? Good. Encourages at least a little late honesty, even though you should have been honest and not stolen in the first place. Judaism takes theft very, very seriously. Anyone who steals so much as a pruta, meaning that penny thing, from someone else is as though he has taken away his life. As it is said, this is from Proverbs, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, that thus take away the life of the owners. And also from Jeremiah, and you shall eat up your harvest and your bread, that your sons and daughters should eat, meaning that it should be there for them. And further, for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. And it is for, and from 2 Samuel's, it is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. What do you mean? He slew the Gibeonites. So where do we find that Saul killed the Gibeonites? If you look for that story in the Tanakh, you're not going to find it. Since he killed Nob, the city of priests, that would provide them with water and food. Scripture considers him as though he had personally killed them, right? So he killed the people who used to provide them with food, which basically means he has stolen the food from them, and thus he killed them by extension, right? That taking from someone else is similar to taking a life, right? Theft is like murder. Now, that doesn't mean the penalty is the same, right? If you murder someone, the penalty is obviously much harsher than if you steal from someone. But when you are reflecting internally, morally, whether or not I should do this, you should have the same caution in yourself against stealing that you would against murder. And unfortunately, that's not most people's attitude, right? The casual theft that people will do. I'm not talking about the cat burglars that go into giant jewelry stores to steal stuff. I'm talking about the person walking along the street and they see a $20 bill fall out of someone's pocket and they pick it up, right? Or they're walking out of the restaurant and they see $5 that was left for a tip and they just sort of pick that up as they move. Or their neighbor's Wi-Fi is unsecured, so that way they can use a little of their bandwidth. Or maybe they can download the latest movie rather than going to see it in the theater or buying the DVD. Most people don't consider those to be big issues. And indeed, the penalty for all of those is much less than if you went and murdered your neighbor and took their Wi-Fi. But it's still something you should be as on guard against as you would be on guard against killing someone in order to see a new movie. Make sense? Okay. Even this, meaning how far do we go to protect against theft? Well, stonecutters are not subject to the laws of robbery if they keep the chips, meaning if you're chiseling someone's stone. Someone brings you a nice piece of rock and they say, I'd like you to turn this into a statue, and you chisel the statue. Well, all the pieces that fell off that rock, they technically belong to the person who brought you the rock. But the rabbis are saying, no, the person who brought you the rock to be carved never asks for the chips back. And so you are allowed to keep them. But the fact that you might have to wonder about that is showing you how careful we try to be about theft. Workers who trim shrubs or cut vines or weed plants or thin vegetables, if the householder cares about the waste, are subject to the laws of robbery. But if not, then what they cut belongs to them. So if someone comes to your house and you've hired them to cut down a tree, the tree is yours, right? And all that firewood is yours. And if they take it without your permission, that's considered stealing. On the other hand, if you say, no, please take it away, that's perfectly fine. Makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tzedakah. On the other end of our money, this is the first half was all about how we get the money, how we handle our money, how we buy, how we sell. Tzedakah is one of the ways that we use our money or other resources for noble purposes. Tzedakah is usually translated in English as charity. It's not a great translation. Tzedakah comes from the Hebrew word tzedek, which means justice, whereas charity comes from the word cardio, which means heart. Charity is about when you feel sympathy for a person, you will do them kindness. Tzedakah is about when you see a person's condition, you know what is right. Even if you don't feel kindness, even if you don't feel like you like the person, you still have an obligation to help. And telling somebody that you have an obligation to help regardless of your sympathy is, in my opinion, a much more powerful motivator, because you're not doing it because they made you cry. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And in the modern world, especially with social media, it often seems that people are just trying to hit our emotion rather than hit our justice when it comes for helping other people, which is why people will often donate a lot more money to save cute puppies than they will to save ugly humans. Because you know what? Everybody loves a puppy. Not everyone loves other human beings. If anyone is poor among you, among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. But you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. We'll come back to some of the details, but just to get the Torah texts out. And from Leviticus, if any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner or stranger, so they can continue to live among you. And then from the Talmud, said Rav Ila and Usha, sages ordained that he who wants to distribute his possessions may not do so more than a fifth of them. So too, it has been taught on Tanaic authority, the earlier level of rabbis, he who wants to distribute his possessions may not do so more than a fifth of them, lest he fall into need. So you may be so inspired to help other people that you just want to give away everything you own, right? Liquidate your assets and just give them away to the poor. Great emotion, wonderful sentiment, don't do it. Right? If you want to give away 20% of what you own, that's your cap. Because if you give away more than that, there's a chance that you will become dependent on the tzedakah of other people, that you will need other people to support you. And you're not allowed to make yourself deliberately dependent on others to support you. Right? So the idea of just, well, I'll sit back and let someone else take care of me. No. Although it is indeed tzedakah that we will help people in need, you're not supposed to turn yourself into a person in need. If you can do anything to avoid it, you should. So what counts as a needy person? When a person has enough food for 2 meals, it is forbidden for him to take from the tamchui. The tamchui was like the immediate food bank resource in the communities that used to be all Jewish communities. So if someone needed food today, that was always there for them today. Remember, they didn't have canned goods like we do now. They didn't have all of the processed and preservatives that would keep food fresh forever, which meant that when a person was hungry, they needed the food now. So if you had food for today, because 2 meals was all people ate usually back then, they didn't get 3 meals a day. If you had food for 2 days, you didn't get to come and take from that food that was made that day for the poor people. Right? You didn't get to go to the soup kitchen, would be like the modern equivalent. When he has enough food for 14 meals, he should not take from the kupah. The kupah was more like a fund that would help support poor people. It wasn't the immediate food, it was more of other resources that could help support them if they were in need. So if you have enough food for a week, you don't get to take from that. If he has 200 zoos, even if he does not invest or do business with them, or 50 zoos that he does invest, meaning that he's got a little livelihood coming in from some of his deals, he should not take the shichacha, the payout, or the tithe for the poor. So basically, if you've got 200 zoos, you're okay. Right? You're not rich, but you're okay. And if you're okay, you don't get to take the forgotten sheaf, that's the shichacha. You don't get to get the payout, which was the corner of fields that the poor were allowed to take. And when people are distributing their tithe to the poor, which happened every few years, which was 10% of what they had made, you don't get to get in line and ask for some of that. Right? Even though you're not rich, you're good enough that you do not get to have access to these resources that are reserved for the poor. If he has money in hand, but he owes a debt or is under lien to his wife for the ketubah, then he is permitted to take. So they do recognize the problem of debt. That if someone has 200 zuz, but he also owes 500 zuzim, then by all means he can go out in the field and take the extra pieces that are reserved for the poor. Even though he's got liquid assets, they don't really belong to him, they belong to his creditors. Make sense? But how much do we make them be poor? This is a very big topic in anyone that studies the way that we provide welfare to anyone in need. So when a poor person is in need, but owns a courtyard and household utensils, even silver and gold utensils, right? They used to be a wealthy person, they've got gold plates, they've got a lovely house. We do not obligate him to sell his house and his personal possessions. So we don't say, I'm not going to help you, you've got a gold plate, you've got a nice house, I'm not helping you until you sell. No, they don't have to sell. Instead, he is permitted to accept charity, the tzedakah, and it is a mitzvah, it is a commandment to give to him. When does the above apply? With regard to eating utensils, drinking utensils, clothing, bedding, and the like. Basically things that we do need, right? I need clothes. It's not my fault that I bought my clothes when I was rich, right? I shouldn't have to sell my current clothes and buy new clothes that are worse clothes. Just let me wear the clothes I've got. And the same with my plates and the same with my house. I need a house, right? Why should I get rid of my house? I do need one. If, however, he owns a golden comb or a pestle and the like, that was the grinder thing, but it's a fancy one and really, really expensive, he should sell them and buy less valuable ones, right? Because those are not everyday necessity type items. So if I've got a really fancy comb, yeah, that you're going to sell before you go take tzedakah, before you get charity, right? You don't have to sell your gold plates, but you do got to sell your gold comb, because you don't need a comb really like that. And then again, one more restriction. When does the above apply? Before he descended to the level where he takes charity from people at large. That is to say, before he becomes a beggar that goes house to house, street to street. If he's using the community institutions and they're helping him, then he's allowed to keep his house, he's allowed to keep his clothes, allowed to keep his plates. But as soon as he starts going door to door and asking people for help, once he collects community from the charity, we obligate him to sell his utensils and purchase lesser ones and then accept charity. But at that point, you do have to start liquidating some of your finer things in order to support yourself more. And this was part of the idea that tzedakah was meant to help you bounce back. Right? It wasn't about just keeping you alive. The tzedakah was ideally going to take your economic hardship and bounce you back so that you would be able to return to a normal life. It wasn't about, okay, you're poor and you're going to stay poor forever. And so we're just going to work out a way to keep, take care of you. It was about how do we just give you enough spring to bounce you back so that your life can go on back in the normal pattern. But if you are reaching the point now where you really are hitting the bottom, then we're going to have to work out a new system for your assets. Okay? Self-restraint, meaning how do I live my life so I don't need other people to give me tzedakah? One should always restrain himself and submit to privation, meaning do without, rather than be dependent upon others or cast himself upon public tzedakah. For thus the sages commanded us, saying, make a Shabbat, a Sabbath, a weekday, rather than be dependent on other people. Meaning, if you have to choose between accepting tzedakah or having to actually work on Shabbat, you work on Shabbat. Right? Obviously, working on Shabbat is something that is not something that we should be doing. But if it's a choice between doing that once and having to actually be supported by the community, then you work and you find a way to fix your life so that this is not going to happen again. But you shouldn't just expect other people to have to support you. Right? Even if one is a sage, held in honor, once he has become impoverished, he should engage in a trade, be it a loathsome trade, rather than be dependent upon other people. It is better to skin hides off animal carcasses than to say to other people, I am a great sage, I am a priest, sustain me. Right? If you are normally quite well off and well respected in the community, but now you are poor, and the only job around is cutting the skin off of dead animals in the marketplace, which was a nasty job then, and it's still a nasty job now, you do the nasty job. You don't say, this job is beneath me. You do what you have to in order to put food on your table, and you don't sit back and say, you support me because I'm too dignified for doing this work. Not appropriate. So did the sages command us. Among the great sages, there were hewers of wood, carriers of beams, drawer of water to irrigate gardens, and workers in iron and charcoal. They did not ask for public assistance, nor did they accept it when offered to them. Right? So our tradition is very much telling us we have to help those in need, and we have to do everything we can to keep ourselves from being someone in need. And that is a way that we keep a very healthy system. Right? No one should expect others to take care of them, and no one should be left without someone to take care of them. And with me being generous to help others, and me on the other side being strong to prevent needing others to take care of me, the system works very well. But if one side decides to become tight-fisted and not want to share, or the other side decides that they want to not work and just let someone else take care of them, then the society falls apart. It's built off this mutual trust and mutual respect. And again, with this idea that tzedakah is meant to help a person who's had an unfortunate circumstance. The poor are not considered bad in Judaism. They're considered to have had a bad situation happen to them. And our job is to get them so that out of that situation, so that they don't have to depend upon this in the future. And that is a very, very brief summary of many complicated topics. But hopefully at least it gives you a taste for the way Judaism handles these issues. Any questions on this topic?
I have a few, but anyway. Because I have before I got here, learning about Judaism, I always have, since I was a little girl, I heard from my mom, from my grandmother, that if you give out there, God will reward you some way, somehow. I'm a firm believer of that, because I have seen that. I have believed that.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be money. It could be service. Right. It could be helping someone without no interest.
Yes. Unfortunately, there is a theology that took hold in America that has said the reason you give to charity is because God will reward you with more money. And it is a terrible idea that some communities preach, and absolutely not a Jewish idea at all. Judaism says that, yes, no one ever goes broke by helping people who are poor. Right? God's not going to let you become poor just because you're doing your duty of tzedakah. Right? If you give $5 to someone who is in need and they're on the street corner and you're helping them to have food that day, you're not going to go home and find out that your house has been taken from you because you don't have $5. Right? That's not the way it works. On the other hand, we don't look for a physical reward when we give tzedakah to other people. We don't expect God to repay me in the same currency.
The same way.
The same currency.
It's going to be different.
Right.
Because that's the way I see it. I have seen myself in situations where it's not about money, but sometimes you see yourself in a desperate situation, like your car got broken or a tire, and out of the blue, you shows up someone that you don't even expected, the one that you think is gonna help you that way. So that's the way I say, like, God always, I always say that to people, because some people, they're always expecting like money or something in material. And I'm like, no, you have to see it that God always gonna reward you. It could be in good health, it could be in other things that you have to be always grateful about it, you know?
Yeah. When people treat God like a slot machine, where if I keep putting coins in, I'm going to get the payout, that's the problem, right? And that's not what God is, and it's not what society is. I should also point out, and thank you for reminding me, that I focused mostly on the monetary forms of support, because we began our lesson talking about other monetary issues. But the highest ideal in Judaism for helping someone that is poor is to either give them training or give them a job, to help find a way that they don't need any assistance at all and they can support themselves. In the meantime, we do continue to support them, but the ultimate goal is that we help people in ways that go beyond a check, ways that go beyond our change, but instead give them a way to change their life. That's always considered to be the highest goal that we have when helping another person. Okay, good.